My name is Jacob Bennett. I'm 27 years old, and I've always considered myself a skeptic. Ghosts, monsters, and scary stories were never more than fairy tales to me. I work a dull office job in Chicago, surrounded by numbers and spreadsheets. And my life has always been predictable. That all changed when my best friend, Nate, convinced me to spend a weekend in the woods. "It'll be good for you, Jacob. Fresh air, no stress, no work," he said enthusiastically. He talked about a remote forest in Washington state, near Mount Baker, quiet, isolated, the perfect escape. I reluctantly agreed. Nate brought his survivalist friend Travis and Sarah, a girl who never put her camera down. We packed Nate's old pickup truck with camping gear, food, and supplies, and set off on a Friday morning. The drive into the forest took hours. As we went deeper, the light dimmed under the canopy of towering pines. The road turned into a narrow dirt path, and branches scraped against the truck like fingers clawing at the windows. "Man, this place is straight out of a horror movie," Sarah joked nervously, adjusting her camera. "Relax, Sarah, it's just trees," Nate laughed. By the time we reached the clearing by the lake, the sun was sinking behind the mountains. The lake was still and black, its surface like polished glass. The air was damp, carrying the faint smell of wet leaves and decay. "This spot is perfect," Travis said, unloading his gear. I wasn't so sure. There was something about the silence. No birds, no crickets. We set up our tents as darkness fell. Sarah wandered around, filming everything with her camera. That's when she found it. "Guys, look at this," she called, her voice shaky. We walked over to where she stood, pointing her camera at a totem carved into a tree. It was about 3 feet tall, roughly hewn into the trunk. Its face was triangular, with hollow, empty eyes and jagged teeth etched into a twisted grin. Travis frowned. "This wasn't here long, the cuts are fresh." "Creepy as hell," I muttered. Sarah kept filming, zooming in on the totem's strange markings. I didn't like the way it seemed to stare back at us. That night we sat around the fire, telling stories and trying to shake off the unease. Nate made jokes, Travis gave us survival tips, and Sarah recorded everything. The fire crackled, its light casting shifting shadows across the trees. Then we heard it, a faint shuffling sound from the edge of the clearing. He froze, straining to hear. "What was that?" Sarah whispered. "Probably an animal," Travis said, but his voice was uneasy. The sound grew louder. A branch snapped somewhere in the darkness. "I'll check it out," Travis said, grabbing a flashlight. "Don't go far," Nate called after him. We waited. Minutes passed. Travis didn't come back. Nate swore under his breath and grabbed another flashlight. "Stay here, I'll find him." And then he was gone too. As we come back, Sarah and I sat in silence, huddled by the fire. "They've been gone too long," she whispered. Her chest ached. I was about to answer when we heard it. A scream. Long, raw, and inhuman. It echoed through the trees, and then silence. Sarah clutched my arm. "Jacob, someone's out there." That's when I saw it. At the edge of the clearing, just beyond the reach of the firelight, stood a figure. It was impossibly tall, its limbs unnaturally long, hanging at its sides like dead weight. Its face was pale, almost white, and featureless except for 2 hollow eyes that glowed faintly. "Hi!" It didn't move, it just watched. "Run!" I whispered. We sprinted to the truck. I glanced back once and the figure was gone. Was it Joe?
We didn't stop driving until we reached the city. I tried to tell myself we'd imagined it, that the forest had gotten into our heads, but I knew better. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it standing there, tilting its head to look at me. Days passed. Nate wouldn't answer his phone. Sarah locked herself in her apartment. And then I got a text from Nate. "It won't stop. I'm already there. Hurry." I didn't think. I grabbed Sarah's camera, got into my car and drove back to the forest. The clearing looked abandoned. Our tents were still there, torn and dirty. The totem was still standing, its grin wider than before. Jacob, too. I spun around. Nate stood at the edge of the lake. He looked wrong. His face was pale, his clothes filthy, and his eyes empty. "We have to go back," he said. I shook my head. "No, we're leaving." "You can't leave." Suddenly, from the water, they began to rise. Figures. Dozens of them. Their bodies were thin and twisted, their faces pale and blank, their eyes glowing red. Sarah was among them. Her red coat clung to her, dripping with black water. She tilted her head and smiled, her mouth stretching far too wide. Highness," she whispered. Hands shot up from the ground, grabbing my ankles. I screamed and thrashed, reaching for the only thing I had left, Sarah's camera. I turned it on and pointed it at them. Dead. The forest froze. The figures stopped moving. Their bodies flickered, as if they were glitches in a broken video. The totem cracked, and the forest screamed. A sound so loud it split the air. I heard the music too, and then silence.